Let's talk about the need for solo training in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. That almost sounds like a contradiction in terms because, as you all know, Jiu-Jitsu requires an opponent. When you go to train with people, there's a reason that you need an opponent to work against. You have to go into a crowded room and work with other people. So a natural question to ask is this even going to be beneficial? Can I enhance my performance levels by training by myself? Let's understand that the definitive answer in this video will be absolutely. This will be a beneficial part of your training. Not only is it beneficial, but there's a direct need for it. As much as Jiu-Jitsu is a social sport that requires opponents, there's a reality that life is complicated, and there's not always going to be times that you can train in your dojo with your partners. There's going to be times you're traveling. There's going to be times you have a family crisis. Probably the most common scenario is one where you're injured and you can't go in and train with opponents in live sparring and drilling. In any one of these scenarios, there's always going to be good reasons why you can't train with others. And one of the axioms of my coaching program is a day without training is a wasted day. You're not going to pull that 24 hours back. Every single day you live your life is an opportunity to get just a little better at the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. And that includes days where you don't go into the dojo. The intention of this video is to show exactly how we can take days off from the gym that aren't days off from progress. There's things you can do by yourself in isolation that will absolutely make you better when you return to the dojo. Of course, the single most important part of your training is going to be partner training with resisting opponents. That's uncontested. But let's not devalue the idea of solo training. We're going to look at the multiple uses and benefits of solo training throughout this video. But let's start with this simple idea that solo training is an important part of your development in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. It's made necessary by events that are often out of your control, but even when your body is healthy and you have the opportunity to train with others, there are still direct benefits to solo training. Let's talk about 3 axioms of Jiu-Jitsu training which underlie this entire video and which have great importance for your development as a developing athlete. The first thing I want to talk about is the idea that every move in Jiu-Jitsu has underlying body movement associated with it. This is an extraordinarily simple and yet very, very deep point about the nature of training in Jiu-Jitsu. I'll say it again because it's very important. Every single move that you learn in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu has underlying movement associated with it. It's almost impossible to learn the moves well if you can't perform those underlying movements. The second thing that I want to talk about is the idea of athleticism. People throw the word athleticism around all the time in various combat sports. The most important thing to understand is that what we describe as athleticism is always domain specific. Attributes that make you athletic in one scenario will not contribute to making you athletic in another scenario. Now, Jiu-Jitsu is unique among the various grappling sports insofar as it puts extraordinary emphasis on the ground, and in particular postures and movement styles on the ground. Most notably, the idea that you have to work effectively off your back. I'm sure you've all had the experience of witnessing, or you might even be someone like this yourself, someone who was a good athlete in another sport, say for example football or hockey or what have you, come in for their first class in Jiu-Jitsu and look like they've never done anything athletic in their life. You've probably also seen the reverse. People who are very good in Jiu-Jitsu suddenly have to go and do another sport, say for example boxing or wrestling, and they look like bumbling amateurs. The idea here is very simple. What we describe as athletic prowess is always specific to a given domain. Because the domain of Jiu-Jitsu is quite unusual, almost entirely on the ground, with 50% of that being on your back, it's difficult for people coming from other sports to take whatever athleticism they had in those other sports and apply it in this new context. All athleticism is contextual. One of the fastest ways you can speed your progress as a developing student is to learn the movements that will make you appear athletic in the specific domain of jiu-jitsu. The better you get at exhibiting those traits of ground athleticism, the faster your progress will be with the actual moves of the sport. Remember, the ultimate idea is to be able to develop skill, to develop a wide repertoire of moves in the sport so you can be effective when you go against another resisting human being in a competitive situation. That's what it always comes back to. It's about sports performance. The sport of jiu-jitsu, you want to go out there and be competitive with the best people, you have to be able to move like an athlete. Because what we call athleticism in jiu-jitsu is radically different from most other sports, it requires a deep sense of training in the athletic movements specific to jiu-jitsu. That's going to be a huge part of what we do here. The third big theme of this video is the idea of shadow grappling. You're all familiar with the idea of shadow boxing, and I'm sure you've all seen on many occasions the talented boxers that we see in Olympic competition and in professional boxing working beautifully with their various shadow boxing routines. My contention is that shadow grappling routines can play a very important part of your development, just as shadow boxing plays an important part in the development of elite striking athletes. Now, I want to discuss something important here. When most people look at solo drills in jiu-jitsu, their experience of them in the gym is almost always as part of a class warm-up. Okay? Many of the moves that we look at here today are going to be done, or you'll see and be familiar with, as something you do as a warm-up before class. There's nothing wrong with that. They are fine as a warm-up. But that's not the point of this video. Ultimately, what's going to make you take these skills that you learn, these physical skills, and allow them to make you a better athlete working against a competitive opponent when you go back to your regular training, is the integration of mind and body. When you use these movements as simply a warm-up, where you're just shrimping up and down the mats for repetition, or in some sense, we just have to pump out a certain number of numbers of repetition, the movements become thoughtless. And as a result, they don't really have much benefit. I know many people who can shrimp up and down the mats all day, but they can't shrimp their way out of the mounted position. Okay, that's a real failure. There has to be a tangible benefit to you doing these movements. You can't just flop around on the mat and do movements which don't enhance your sports performance. That's worthless. My idea is to give you a solo set of drills that actually enhance your performance in a competitive situation. If it doesn't do that, it's not worth your time. The only way you can accomplish this is to change your approach to shadow grappling from a warm-up before class, which is done without thought for numbers or distance, and instead start to include the idea of visualization and imagination in your mind, where you are imagining an opponent and you are imagining a scenario that you are in, so that the movements take on a live characteristic. Instead of having a live opponent in front of you, you have a lively imagination in your mind. And that is what propels you from move to move, scenario to scenario, so that you are actively engaging your mind as you perform the physical movements. Just as a good shadow boxer truly imagines an opponent in front of him moving in certain ways and him reacting to that, so too a good shadow grappler imagines an opponent around him and moves in response to the imagined movements. When you integrate mind and body in this fashion, you're shadow grappling instead of simply performing meaningless movements flopping around on the floor with no tangible benefit. My intention in this video is to give you the physical movements you need and then a training routine which engages the mind and body together so that you are, in a sense, grappling an imaginary opponent rather than simply doing a certain number of moves for a certain number of repetitions. The minute you bridge that gap and you go from solo drills as a meaningless warm-up that has no real carryover to your actual sparring, it's just something you do before class to raise your body temperature, and you start to make it part of an active, imaginative exercise where mind and body are integrated, then you start getting tangible benefits from solo drills. The way we're going to do this in this video is I will demonstrate physical movements. Then with a partner, I will show how they are relevant to the actual sport of jiu-jitsu when it's done in a competitive situation against an opponent. And then we'll give you a training routine where you can start to imagine an opponent, even though you're by yourself, working against them and shadow grappling. So again, we're not just going to use a bunch of meaningless movements flopping around on the mat for a warm-up routine, but rather to get you pushing towards the idea of shadow grappling, just as a good shadow boxer can enhance his performance all by himself, so too can a good shadow grappler. As a coach, one of the most commonly asked questions I receive is always the question, how can I speed up the rate of my progress learning the sport of jiu-jitsu? Over the years, I've always noticed that certain people definitely seem to progress faster than others. Of course, probably the single most relevant element here is training time. How much time is devoted to training? The second element would be the efficiency of use of that training time. It's no good spending vast amounts of time training if the manner in which you train is just woefully inefficient. So the idea that of amount of time spent and the efficiency of which that time is spent is probably the single biggest determinant of rate of progress in learning. But there is another element which I've always noticed over the years. Certain people seem to pick up the physical skills of jiu-jitsu more easily because more than anything else, they have movement skills. They have physical dexterity, which enables them to perform the moves faster than people who lack that dexterity. These solo drills are designed to give you the kind of physical dexterity which is necessary in the specific sport of jiu-jitsu. Probably the greatest gift that this video can give you is the various kinds of body movement which enable you to move in an efficient fashion down on the floor against a resisting opponent. I'll say it again, if you have the underlying dexterity and ease of movement, you will progress faster in the sport than someone who lacks it. In addition, the other great theme that we're going to be looking at here, jiu-jitsu ultimately is the science of control that leads to submission. Everything is about controlling your opponent. But I'll say this to you now, you will never be able to control an opponent until you first learn to control the movements of your own body. There's simply no hope to control another resisting human being if you can't even control your own body movement. Developing that physical dexterity and ease of motion on the floor is your first big step towards that, and the first way and the best way to do this is with solo grappling drills. Now, the first body skill that you're going to have to start with in the sport of jiu-jitsu is the skill of bridging. Let's understand that bridging is a little different in the sport of jiu-jitsu. There are many other sports out there where bridging has a very different intention. So, for example, in the sport of wrestling, bridging is often used as a means of developing a strong back arch throat. So it's often done in a standing position, where from a standing start, we bridge back, looking over our shoulders and take someone over as a throw. Also in the sport of wrestling, bridging is often used as a method of getting your shoulders off the mat to prevent pinning due to the rules of the sport. In gymnastics, bridging is a precursor to many of the various acrobatic moves in which they engage, and so often they bridge onto their hands rather than head and shoulders. All of these are wonderful forms of bridging. They all have their relevance in those sports, but in the sport of jiu-jitsu, bridging has a very definite purpose, and that's to take you from a supine position to a prone position. You start on your back, finish on your hands and knees. Okay. As a result, almost all of the bridging in jiu-jitsu goes over a shoulder rather than a head or onto the hands. The result of this is that the amplitude of the bridge is significantly less. we're not looking for a deep arch in our spine so much as we're looking for the rotation of our body from supine to prone. That requires only a very small lift from the floor. And so the primary movement in Jiu-Jitsu bridging is not amplitude of arch, but rather it's the generation of torque that takes you from supine to prone. Our whole intention is to take someone who's on top of us and quickly whip them over into a position where we go from facing the ceiling to one in which we face the floor, and presumably now we're on top of our opponent. This is done through the generation of torque. You'll see that when I did that bridge, there was not a tremendous lift or arch in my spine. My hips only came a small distance off the floor. The primary concern when we bridge in Jiu-Jitsu is torque, to take a weight which is on top of us and transfer it to underneath us. Okay? If I bridge straight up in the air, that doesn't help me at all. No matter how high my bridge goes, no matter how flexible my spine, my opponent's still on top of me. We end up and he's still on top. The whole idea is to displace weight in Jiu-Jitsu. It's not to carry weight, it's to displace it to either side. So what we need is a bridge which goes to a given direction. That direction is never up, as it would be in, say, yoga or gymnastics, but rather to a tilt to the side. Okay? That means that when we go to work our bridging, the head is going to play a very important role. I'll demonstrate the bridge lined up with the camera. When we first work in this position, I need to take my opponent to a given side. I'm going to start with my feet. If my 2 feet plant on the floor and I bridge, all I do is go straight up to the ceiling. The only way I can effectively displace an opponent is to have an asymmetrical bridge, where one foot is flat and the other foot points out in the direction of my bridge. The idea now is that when I apply force, I go up onto a shoulder. My knee goes into the floor and I create a drive leg. All my power currently comes from the right foot, but I must now transfer this to the left foot, push off the mat, and as a result, we end up with a nice bridge. Let's understand the function of our head in this. Lining up with the camera now, you can see that when I bridge in this fashion, if my head looks up to the ceiling, the bridge is actually stopped by my own head. So what I have to do in these circumstances is to start with the eyes. Every bridge begins with the eyes. I take my eyes and I look in the direction of the bridge. That direction should be a straight line coming out of my head. So once again, our feet line up, one flat on the floor, the other out to the side. My intention is to look straight up and overhead. So my head is no longer a roadblock for my own bridge. Now as I arch, my knee touches the floor. This foot here actively digs into the mat. Don't just come down on a dead foot. When that happens, there's no weight transfer and your bridge flops. So it's important here, once we get up, our foot actively pushes into the mat. As my right foot comes off the mat, the drive switches from right foot to left foot. And as a result, we end up in a good, compact, athletic position. Now it's important when we finish the move, we don't come up into an extended position, okay? You see this all the time. People do a good job of coming up to the side, doing everything right, but then they come over and flop into a position from which they simply can't be effective. It's important in these situations that once we commit to the side, there's my footwork, as my hips come up off the mat and the weight transfers onto a shoulder, we look in the direction of the bridge. From here we come up, I transfer from my right foot driving to my left foot. We come up into a compact athletic position from where we can be effective. Okay, I'll call in a partner now so you can see how this would apply with a partner. Giancarlo is on top in the mounted position, facing towards the camera. Obviously from here our first responsibility is going to be to trap an arm. It's no good bridging if my opponent can base out and resist. Once we get that arm trapped, then from here we trap our training partner's foot, my feet go into that asymmetrical position, my head comes over, and now you'll see Giancarlo start putting his hand out for base. But if I play this game correctly, I will be able to overturn his base and come up into a compact athletic position inside my opponent's guard. Facing in another direction now. From here. Giancarlo comes into a good position. We successfully go through and trap our training partner's arm. You do this in any way you wish. From here, we lock up. You see everything goes on to the shoulder, forcing his defensive reaction with his second hand, even as his hand comes out further and further for base. If I play my cards correctly here, we look in the direction we want to go, his base of support just runs out at a certain level. Now I just push off my remaining foot and we come up inside our training partner's guard and in good position. Used in this way, the bridge will be an absolutely crucial part of your development. We'll see also that the bridge ties into other solo movements that we have to perform. It gives you that fundamental skill of going from a supine position to a prone position, from bottom to top in a very short period of time, even against much heavier opponents. Understand that bridging in Jiu-Jitsu, because of the very nature of the sport, does have a somewhat different look from what many people in other sports would characterize as a good bridge. It tends to have low amplitude, where the emphasis is on torque and speed of rotation that takes you from supine to prone position. Now, let's spend some time looking what is incontestably the body movement most associated with the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. This is shrimping. It's the basis of the entire bottom game in the sport. And so even though bridging has tremendous importance, I think it's pretty clear to say that shrimping is the heart and soul of body movement, and the first and most important body movement that you must master. Now, unfortunately, shrimping is normally taught in a rather complacent fashion as a warm-up before class, where people simply shrimp mindlessly up and down the mat and probably are left at the end of it wondering what the hell that has to do with combat sports. Let's change that and start to see shrimping not as a warm-up, but rather as a skill to be mastered. Let's understand there are different forms of shrimping. Okay, we're going to look at a conventional pushing shrimp and look at some variations of that. Okay, the first and most important one for you to learn is the idea of a power shrimp, where we have to take our hips off the mat. So in fact, a power shrimp begins with almost exactly the same movement that we saw with bridging. The idea is we're going to come up with our hips up off the floor onto a shoulder and have just our feet in contact with the mat and one shoulder. Okay, our elbows will always be close to our own torso. It's very hard to perform these movements with extended arms. So as a general rule, we want our elbows close to our own torso. A good thing to have is just your hands close together, like you're in a prayer kind of situation, and that will keep your elbows automatically close to your own torso. So from a situation where we start off, we get our feet asymmetrical, one foot flat on the mat, one foot turned outwards, and from here we come up and onto our shoulder like so that there's a slight facing down towards the mat of my body, and the only points of contact I have with the mat are my feet and my shoulder. Now, this gives us an ability to move our hips. Okay, if I just turn over onto my side, my hips don't move well on the floor. I have no ability to generate power off the floor. Okay, and so what passes for a shrimp for most people, it's kind of like a lazy sliding movement, doesn't generate any kind of athletic potential on the part of the bottom athlete. That's why you'll often see people who shrimp like this for hours on end, but then when it's time to actually perform an escape on a resisting human being, they're helpless. They can't utilize the movement they've used at all. So what we want to be able to do is to be able to come up and off the floor so that we have some kind of athletic potential here. And we can use our feet now to join elbow and knee together and create a motion where my knee and elbow come through and my hips come out on the other side. Now from here, we perform a second movement where again, only the feet and shoulders are in contact with the floor. We bring elbow and knee together. We come up. No contact with the mat except the feet and the shoulder, and as a result, elbow and knee can come together, and my knee comes inside my own hands, just as it would come inside my opponent's knee in a live competitive situation where I was trying to escape from mount or bottom side control. And then from here, we come up to the other side. I'll demonstrate it from a different angle. We start off, we have an opponent on top of us. My feet come up just like so, and we come up off the floor, just like this. Now my hips have an ability to move side to side. I have an ability to invert my knee, so my knee goes inside my imaginary opponent's knee, and as a result, we can come out on the other side. Now from here, we come out, and from this position, elbow and knee come out together, and we put our opponent hopefully back in guard. Now, that's the power shrimp. Let's contrast that with a sliding shrimp, which is probably the one more familiar to most of the viewers of this video. In a sliding shrimp, we simply plant the foot out wide, and I slide my body out along the mat. I plant the foot, and I slide out along the mat. As a general rule, you want to be able to move at least 90 degrees with your hips. So if we have a given line, here's a line on the tatame. If my shoulders are on that line, like so. When I go to shrimp, I want my hips to come up to what was my shoulder line, okay? So I plant my foot, and then from this position, we shrimp, and my hips come all the way up to the shoulder line. You don't want to be lazy with this, where you simply shrimp the minimum distance to struggle down the mat as a warm-up before class. The idea is we measure out our shoulder line, and my hips should come up to that line. When we start, you have to move your foot. Don't just shrimp from wherever your feet are. You'll never get to the shoulder line. From here, we have to move our foot out wide, and foot goes up to the buttocks. Only that will enable us to push and get our hips all the way up to the line of our shoulder. Now we bring our foot out on the other side, and we repeat the process, bringing our hips all the way up to the shoulder line. You want to finish with your hands right in front of your knees, like so. So every time we come out, we come hips to shoulder line, hands to knees, okay? And by combining sliding and power shrimps, you'll be an effective athlete working from bottom. Let's look now at some common sense examples of how this could be used against an opponent. Giancarlo is on top of me in the mounted position. I'm just going to demonstrate first with our feet towards the camera. If Giancarlo has his feet close together and he's in the mounted position, and I simply slide along the mat, you're going to see that I'll never escape from the mounted position. Lock your feet back. From here, when I just slide along the mat, he stays locked to my body. The only way I'm going to get out is to put either elbow or hand inside my opponent's knee. I can't be naive here and offer my elbow to Giancarlo to go underneath like so. So it's important under these circumstances that when we block on our opponent, we come up so that our hips are off the floor, and now with my knee inverted, I easily go inside my training partner's knee. So we're halfway out. Now from here, we perform a sliding shrimp on the other side. So you see I slide my body out, my legs come around, and from here, we have our opponent back in guard. Can you see what's happening? The first shrimp was a power shrimp. It got my hips off the floor and enabled me to invert my knee. What does that mean? When we first go into shrimp, if my knees face up to the ceiling, I'll never get past Giancarlo's leg. The key element behind the idea of a power shrimp is the inversion of my knee. So my knees face down towards the floor. It's that which enables me to get inside his knee. Then we perform a sliding shrimp to free the second leg and put our opponent back in guard. So once again, if I just slide, I'll never get out of the mounted position. So we have to wedge the inside of his knee. Then from this position, I take my hips up off the floor, looking over my head as we saw earlier. And then with my knee inverted, lock those legs tight, Giancarlo. Even when his feet are crossed, I'll always be able to get my knee inside his. Now from here, we perform a sliding shrimp. I slide, my knee comes through, and now we're in the perfect position to put our opponent back in guard. So too, when we're being pinned across side. If my opponent was relaxed and not particularly skilled in jiu-jitsu, it might be enough just to slide out and bring my knee in. But if Giancarlo's knees are in tight and he's holding me here and doing a good job, you can see he's controlling my hip. So every time I slide out, he just slides with me. I never get my knee inside. So the idea here is to hit a power shrimp, where we begin with a bridge that moves his head and creates a situation where my knee goes in very easily. Then a slide shrimp, and he's back in our guard. Okay? So this idea that we must understand there are two forms of shrimping. The power shrimp initiates the movement. Because it involves a small bridge, it knocks our opponent out of balance and creates an inverted knee. that inverted knee fits into the tightest crevice to get inside your opponent's knee or hip to escape side or mounted positions. Then we free the second leg with a simple sliding shrimp. And the combination of those two body movements together is going to make you effective at getting out of these annoying pins. Now, we just looked at the skill of shrimping, which I believe, and I'm sure 99.9% of the Jiu-Jitsu community would agree with me on this, is the single most important body movement associated with the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. That's the one you must focus on. Now, I'm going to say something which probably fewer people would agree with me on, and that's it. There is a very close second to shrimping in terms of value and importance for you as a developing athlete, and that is reverse shrimping. This is a kind of shrimping that never gets any attention and yet is absolutely crucial, especially in the higher levels of the sport, to become effective in bottom position. Okay, let's understand what is reverse shrimping. Well, conventional shrimping that we just saw in the previous sequence is a pushing movement. The idea in a basic shrimp is that I plant a foot and I push off that foot so that I have minimal contact with the mat, and as a result I can move my hips freely, invert my knee, and start escaping. Okay, so that's conventional shrimping. Now, what is reverse shrimping? That's a pulling movement, where instead of planting a foot and pushing off the mat, I plant my toes and pull on the mat. What it does, what it's designed to do, is to change the spatial relationship between you and your opponent. Okay, and it's going to become very, very important when you're stuck under tight pins. So the basic body movement is we're going to reach along the mat and plant the ball of the foot and the toes on the mat. The complete opposite of what we do in a normal shrimp, where we plant the heel and push. Here, we're planting the ball of the foot and we pull ourselves towards that foot. So we plant and pull. We plant and pull. We plant and pull, as opposed to plant and push, plant and push. So we're moving forwards when we drill it in repetition. It takes me from a situation where I'm on my right hand side and converts it to one where I'm on my left hand side. Now, the first question you're probably asking is, what the hell is the value of that? How's that going to help me against someone who's holding me down? Well, let's look at some common sense examples. Very often, you will find it difficult to get out of a given pin type situation, and you need to change the angle to get the ball rolling. Another very common scenario is one where you're defending a very strong form of guard pass, and as a result, you need to change the angle between you and your opponent to be effective. Okay, let's say, for example, my training partner is standing over me and he's done a great job of passing my legs and is coming around to the side. Not only is he coming around to the side, but he's starting to get damn close to chest contact. As a result, he's gone past my initial frames, and as he comes down towards chest to chest position, he's getting very, very close. He's come onto my forearms. You can see it's going to be hard work to defend from here. Okay, he's in a position where he can start pushing my knees down, and my knees are now facing the wrong way to put him back in guard. Okay, so as I feel an opponent getting closer and closer and my knees are being pushed off in the wrong direction, that's where reverse shrimping comes in. I put my foot on the mat and I pull my ass towards my foot. As my frame comes up into place, I now get opportunities to throw my legs back in, and from here we're in a position where we can go back in and retain our guard. Did you see what happened here? It took me from a situation where I was about to be pinned across side to one where I switched our orientation to north-south, and as a result I was able to high leg over and put my opponent back in guard. So once again, a common situation, my opponent goes into pass and does a good job of coming in almost across side. Now I have to change the orientation between us, so I use a reverse shrimp to bring everything in, almost like a quasi north-south position, and from there we can go in with our legs and recover and get back into a good sound attacking position. Another way in which you might use this is when you actually are pinned across side. Now, you'd love to hit a conventional elbow escape, you'd love to hit all the normal escapes, but sometimes it's tough and we've got to change the angle. So we're getting pinned down here and we're having a hard time getting our normal escapes to work. So we're going to take our foot and we're going to give a little bump and a reverse shrimp. It gets our body back inside. Okay. Now from here, as Giancarlo comes down on top and tries to create those new angles, we bring knees together, spin underneath our training partner, and from here, we're back into a good sound attacking position. So when I feel my escapes in a given body angle just aren't working, I'm going to change the orientation of my body relative to his. Here we are. I'm having no success with my conventional elbow escapes or what have you. So from this position, look how I take my body out to the side and I physically pull along the mat. So that now we're almost quasi north-south. As he goes in to reassert the new pin, there's space that we can take advantage of. And as a result, from here, we're able to go to work. So these might be good examples where we can use reverse shrimping. Some other classic examples of reverse shrimping in operation from bottom half guard, for example. From a situation where I've gotten deep around my opponent's legs, like so, and we want to start tilting our training partner over, we're going to trap our training partner's ankle from here. I do a good job of tilting my opponent, but he does a good job of basing out with his right arm. So from here, we've almost got him up, but he's not quite there yet, okay? Under these circumstances, we're gonna hit reverse shrimping. I plant my right foot on the mat, and I start pulling myself down towards the floor and knock the man over. Even when Giancarlo goes to follow my movement, it's so difficult for him to keep up with that transition from reverse shrimp to standard shrimp. Reverse shrimp starts it. Conventional shrimp finishes it. Reverse shrimp. Conventional shrimp. Reverse shrimp. Conventional shrimp. And as a result, we're able to score that knockdown. So these are some practical ways in which this all-important yet somewhat undervalued movement of reverse shrimping can play an important role in your game. Now, the next body movement that we're going to look at is one that gets a lot of derision and fun pointed at it. That's scooting, or butt scooting as it's often referred to. I know a lot of people rag on butt scooting and say that it's this dreadful thing which has become prevalent in jiu-jitsu over the last decade or so. Let's understand something. It's an important part of the sport. The idea behind scooting is that it's a more efficient way for me to move forwards and backwards than shrimping is in terms of distance covered. It's easier for me to cover more distance when I'm in a seated position, scooting, than it is when I'm in a supine position, shrimping. Okay, so the idea behind this is, if I'm down on my back, I can only move so fast. But when I'm seated, I can move both forwards and backwards much more rapidly and cover much more distance. Okay, when I'm down here, if I use reverse shrimping, it puts a definite limit on how fast I can move. But when I come up to a seated position, because there's much less contact with the mat, and I get a much greater ability to lift hips off the floor and throw my body from one side to the other and move forwards and backwards in this fashion, you can see my movements are much faster. So it's a way for me to keep bottom position. Okay, sometimes in the sport of jiu-jitsu, for tactical reasons, there's good reasons to stay on bottom. It might be because your opponent's better than you in the standing position, you're reluctant to stand up, or you just have some kind of gain from bottom. Perhaps you're someone who favors the idea of entering into your opponent's legs for leg lock actions or what have you. These are good times for you to stay in the seated position and scoot. Okay, you're going to be much, much faster and much, much more active and have a wider range of movements available to you in a seated position than you will down here in a supine position where you're more or less stationary. So understand that if we are in a seated position like this, if the situation should demand it, it's very easy for you to go straight back to your back and resume more conventional supine positions as well. So even though people make fun of it, it's an important part of the game. Get used to it. So two ways to scoot: two-handed methods and one-handed methods. When we go forward, it's almost always one-handed methods, like so. Okay, the idea is I'm going to have a foot which plants, and if I want to throw my body forward, I plant on that foot, everything goes forward, and I can cover quite a bit of distance in a short motion. When I go backwards, I have the option of one hand scooting methods and two-handed scooting methods. Two-handed scooting methods are faster, but they do tie up both of your arms. So you've got to move quickly to where you want to go, and then reassert your various methods of posturing. As a general rule, you can scoot forward without hands, but it's not a particularly fast-moving way to do it. You might want to do this for tactical reasons, but for movement reasons, it's better to plant a hand. Okay. As a general rule, we don't encourage planting two hands and moving forward. That's way too risky. It's okay to move quickly backwards, like so, and reassert yourself, but I don't recommend coming forwards towards an opponent like so. Okay, we always want to present a side-on body position to our opponent and move forwards behind the cover of our two knees, rather than presenting a situation where my opponent can pass on either side as I'm scooting forwards. Okay, so the general rule is we can use two-handed scoots in a backwards direction or one-handed scoots. But when it's time to go forwards, we only use the one hand on the floor method. For tactical reasons, occasionally you might like to use a crawling method, but it's rather slow and unwieldy, and I would only use this if I was afraid of various kinds of flying submissions or what have you. When we do post like so, there is some danger on the extended arm of flying submissions, so let's make sure we keep elbow and knee relatively close together, and we're circumspect in the way in which we reach. Okay. Now, you might be, if you're new to Jiu-Jitsu, wondering what the hell does this have to do with combat sports. Let's have a look right now. We have a training partner in front of us. Most of the time when he's interested in passing my guard, he's going to have to close distance on me. Okay, he's going to have to get distance and angle are the first two things he wants to do. If he's far away from me, then from here, there's not much he can do to pass my guard. So the first thing he has to do is close distance. Then the second thing he has to do is get angle. Okay, if I just stay stationary and I give him distance and angle, he's going to pass my guard at some point. So our whole thing is I always want my opponent in front of my legs. Okay, anytime my opponent moves outside of my legs, warning signs go off that that's a bad thing. Okay, so whenever I see my opponent closing distance and getting angle, our thing from here is always to scoot back and recover distance. Okay, I always want my opponent on one side of my body. If I present my body to his center line, he can pass this way or he can pass this way, and I don't know which. Okay, but if I put my opponent on one side of my body, he can't pass this way, it's too far to go. He takes a risk. If he goes in this direction, I can easily trip my opponent out of balance. Okay, so now he can only pass in this direction. So now I know where he's going to go. Okay, so this is the idea behind scooting. It's a method of distance management. Start over with it. So if my opponent is aggressively coming towards me, it might behoove me just to scoot back on two hands for a brief period of time. Okay, so if I see him make a big aggressive movement, I might just do like so. So now again, he's in front of my legs. Okay, if his movements are less aggressive, then I'm probably just going to stay with the one-handed method, just like so. Every time he goes to move forward, we monitor distance, just like so. Okay, now a second kind of problem is an opponent who's retreating from us. Perhaps, for example, he's afraid of your leg lock game. He knows if he stays in front of us in situations like this, it's pretty easy for us now to go into our training partner's legs. Okay, so he might be saying, I don't want this guy going into my legs. So he's playing a tactical game of moving backwards. If I just go like so, or just try to move towards him, it's hopeless. I'll never get a hold of this guy. So when we see someone moving away from us, we have to be able to cover distance. The way we do this is by putting a foot on the floor and planting it, just like so. And then I want to physically throw my body towards my opponent so we make distance on him and cover distance across the floor and get to an opponent who's trying to retreat. If I have an opponent, just moving out in this way, Giancarlo, here he's at distance, I have to be able to cover distance on this guy. Okay, I'm not going to do it two-handed because now he can just jump past my guard in either direction. Okay, I don't have any means of posting him to move it. So I have to be able to cover quite a bit of distance in some of these cases. And the way we do this is by planting a foot. So I switch. Normally I have my body like so. I put my foot down on the floor and I physically jump off the mat. So everything comes off the mat and we cover distance towards our opponent. Okay, so once again, we're here in front of our training partner. He's moving away. He's very cautious and won't engage with me. So here I plant, and then we just throw our body, and now we've closed distance on our opponent, and we're in a situation now where we have contact, and we're ready to play. So those might be some realistic ways in which we use scooting as both an offensive movement of going towards an opponent and a defensive movement for preventing them gaining distance and angle upon us. Now, the next body movement we're going to look at is one of the most important in the entire Jiu-Jitsu curriculum. I personally put this one right up there with shrimping and bridging. That's the idea of a supine heist. The idea here is that we're underneath an opponent's pin and we want to get up from a supine position onto our knees in a prone position. Okay, so the movement is one where I start off just like so. We're going to take our foot out to the side and we're going to give a little heisting motion that takes us over and puts us on our side. So I went from flat on my back, foot comes out, and now we're on our side. From our side, my two elbows are in close to my body. I scissor my legs, just like so. And as a result, I'm in a position where I can come up to an athletic stance underneath my opponent, where I can go to a single leg, for example. From here, we can hit other movements, sit-outs that we'll be looking at later on in this video, and get up on top of our opponent. So it takes us from bottom, hopefully, to top position, courtesy of a takedown movement. So I have an imaginary opponent out to my right. From here, we come out, everything in close. Don't have extended arms here. It's going to make it very, very hard for you to get up. The whole thing is to bring elbow to hip. From elbow to hip, my legs scissor, one over the other. Then from this position, I push off the floor. Don't just have dead feet here. We're actively engaged with the mat. We push off the mat, and we come up into the single leg situation when we're ready to fight from bottom position with the takedown. One more time. Start off from here, flat on our back. Foot comes out. Foot close to buttocks. Don't have your foot out here somewhere. Bring it up to your buttocks to maximize your ability to turn onto your side, almost like a shrimp when you first start off. Then from here, elbows in close. Never working with extended arms, so it's very hard to get up. The idea is I want my top shoulder in front of my bottom shoulder. If the shoulder order is incorrect, you're always going to struggle to get up. So I want the top shoulder in front of the bottom shoulder. That's going to make it very easy for me to scissor, push off the floor. Don't just have dead legs here. Actively pushing off the mat so we can come up and into the single leg situation. Okay, so let's demonstrate this now with Giancarlo, looking at how we would use this in a competitive situation. So the precursor to this movement is always going to be some form of underhook. If Giancarlo has the underhook on me, it's impossible for me to get up. My own underhook will stop me. So our whole thing here is to take our hand and sneak it through as an underhook. Now, the next big problem, let's turn it this, is it's cross face. Okay, I can't turn into a cross face. So we've got to go inside the cross face. Once we get everything inside, you can see what happens here. We shrimp, elbows in close, lock on a tight whistle. And then from this position, legs scissor, we come up, and there's the single leg situation. Hands locked and ready to attack. Okay, so once again, we start off, everything in close. We give a little bump so we can get into that underhook. We give a little bump so we can get inside the crossface. Now from here, elbows come back, we lock onto the legs. He's probably going to put on a whizzer at this point. And then from here, the legs scissor, we push off the mat, and we find ourselves in the single leg situation. Okay, so many ways for us to go down here on the floor to put this man down. Okay, so that's the basic idea behind the supine hip heist, one of the most important methods of operating from bottom position. This functions not only as a pin escape, but also as a very valuable form of guard retention as well. If I have an opponent on top of me, and let's say, for example, he's posted a hand on my hip, and he's throwing my legs by, and from here, even as he's passing my guard, I get my hand as an underhook. Even as he goes into to land across side, we're in a position now where we can come up and turn what seemed like a disastrous situation into one where there's a full reversal, or at very least, me sitting back to guard and retaining my guard. So for example, my opponent goes to pass my guard. From here, he's coming through. At the very least, I'll be able to step back and go back in and retain my guard. Okay, so we can either use this as an entry into a single leg takedown or back into some form of guard recovery. Either way, it's a wonderful thing. Don't underestimate the importance of this move, guys. I put it right up there with bridging, shrimping, reverse shrimping, etc. It's a really critical combat skill for you to learn. Now, let's look at another one of the really foundational body movements of the sport of jiu-jitsu, hip heisting. This is often referred to as a technical stand-up. I have no idea why, because there's nothing particularly technical about it in relation to other moves. All the moves are technical if they're done well, but some of you might know this by another term, technical stand-up, a hip heist. The idea here is that from a given seated position, like so, we're going to put a post hand down on the floor and a post leg here on the mat. This creates a situation where all of your weight is carried on a hand and a foot. And that's going to create an unweighted second leg, which is going to be your heist leg. Okay, so we dig into the mat just like so. We take our hips off the mat and I turn my chest down to the floor and I come up to either a knee or to my feet. Okay, and in this way we go from a seated position to a standing position, either on one knee or 2 feet. Okay, the advantage of this is it takes us from a given height, my head is a certain height when I'm seated, to a situation where there's a possibility of greater height. And from here, things like front headlocks, guillotines become very important. Okay, so the idea, we're here in front of an opponent in a seated position. A supine hip heist, okay, we're down here on the floor, now we're in a seated hip heist. So we put a post hand and a post foot, and my body goes over to the side. I was like so, and I convert like so. That creates the post leg, post hand. We have a free hand, which often snaps our opponent or pushes on our opponent, either pulling down or pushing into the mat. Then it creates a heist leg. The heist leg enables us to turn our chest down to the floor. Never try to heist with your chest facing the ceiling. Okay, you're very easy to knock backwards under those circumstances. But when I go chest down, I'm quite robust here. Okay, now my knee comes back, and as a result, we've gained height on our opponent. You can make that height gain even more dramatic by coming up to your feet. Okay? Now, Giancarlo, can I borrow you? Let's have a look at how this might look in a competitive situation. From open guard, my opponent's on 2 knees. When we work in a situation like this, Giancarlo's head is slightly higher than mine because he's on his knees. I'm on my ass. Okay, so he has a height advantage over me. As we play in this position, I might want a height advantage over him. I can't do it in this position. So from here, I come up and I heist. Now my head is higher than his head. And as a result, we can start bringing people forward into various kinds of attack. You can even stand up and go into flying submissions or what have you. Okay, so from a situation where we start off just like so, and we're playing, look how we have a post hand, that posts on him, a post hand that posts on the floor, a post foot, and then from here, a heisting leg. So we turn, chest down, and we come up, either to a knee or to a foot. Your choice. I normally go up to a knee, and then I gauge things from here. I look at my opponent's reaction. If I see him trying to come aggressively into me, I might go right back down to the floor and look to sweep. If I see he hasn't reacted, then I might go forward and attack a guillotine, etc., etc. But that motion is very, very important. Now let's do a little experiment here. Just take a seated position, Giancarlo. Okay. Common mistake you see with hip heisting. People do it with their chest facing the ceiling. Okay. If Giancarlo lifts his ass off the mat and his chest faces the ceiling, you will see that he has no base whatsoever. It can be knocked over like a reed in the wind. But if Giancarlo turns his chest down to the floor and heists like so, takes his ass off the mat, he's much more robust in this position and can handle the pressure much better. It's much less likely now that I'm going to knock him down. But when the chest is exposed to the ceiling, a single hand will put him down, okay? So that's the most important physical requirement when you go to work like this. Be aware that there is some danger of back exposure when you perform these movements. That's why the post hand is important, okay? Because it's that which prevents me getting to my opponent's back. If there wasn't that, there's some danger here of a skilled opponent moving around behind you and causing problems, okay? So that's the value of the post hand on your opponent. So there's, again, a critical foundational skill for the sport, hip heisting from a seated position. Let's look at one of the really foundational skills of the sport whenever we're employing various forms of open guard. This is leg pummeling. This refers to a jousting action on our part where we fight for position with our feet and knees, so that we don't give up superior position to an opponent. and make it easy for them to pass our guard. It also sets up offense where you can go into various forms of submission holds from bottom, provided you can use your feet and knees dexterously, with great dexterity. The movements themselves are pretty simple. Let's have a look at them right now. From a situation where I'm supine, I'm just going to take my 2 feet and we're going to engage in circles with our feet. I go initially in a given direction, then I reverse the direction, and we're pommeling with our feet. You will notice when I line up with the camera that there are actually 3 separate axes of movement: feet, knees, and hips. And only will you maximize your progress when all 3 are engaged. Okay? So the one which most people notice are the feet, because they move in the biggest circle. But you will notice also that my knees are also moving. And then as we get more aggressive with our pommeling, you'll see that my hips also move. So feet, knees, and hips. My hips are moving side to side. My feet are moving in big circles, and my knees are moving in very small circles. But all 3 together constitute pommeling. Then we switch direction, and we get the same movements. When you first start off, it makes sense to pommel in a supine position. If you're a complete beginner to the sport and you find the coordination of pommeling the 2 legs at the same time difficult, it's fine to start off with a single leg pommel. Interestingly, when you're actually going live against a resisting opponent, you normally use a single leg pommel rather than a double leg pommel. Now let's combine shrimping with a pommel, because that's normally how it's used in a competitive situation. Now, let's look at how pommeling can be useful against an opponent. If I have an opponent here on his knees in my guard, a good thing for him is to get underneath my legs. And if he can do this, it's quite easy for him to start passing my legs. I don't want to give him such a major advantage. So it's important for us to be able to consistently take our foot and pommel it through. So my foot goes from a vulnerable position over his back to one where it's there, underneath, in a safe position. When he goes to lift my leg now, it's impossible. Here, if he lifts my leg, immediate effect. So we always look to get our hips out, and then from here, pommel to a better position. Not only is this defensively sound, but it will set up many forms of offense from which we can get on the attack from bottom position. This plays a similar role to the idea of pommeling position in the standing situation. If we're chest to chest, if I let my opponent get underneath my arm, I've given him a position now where he can easily control my torso. So it's very important under these circumstances that I keep at least one arm in the under position. As he goes to dig in on this side, dig in. From here, look how I can easily take my arm through underneath. Now, I have a much better attacking position than him. If he pommels an arm through inside, the onus is on me to try and work my hand back underneath and get back into that attacking position that we favor. Okay? So too, down on the floor. From situations where opponents try to pommel their arms in, we always look to pommel our feet out. He pommels arms in, and we pommel feet out. He pommels arms in, and we pommel feet out. And in this way, we can keep ourselves in a good attacking position. Okay? Understand that pommeling has both a defensive purpose. When he's got a good position on me, the purpose is primarily defensive. Okay? But once we get a good position, then it can be used in an offensive fashion, where I can pommel out of a given position and into an offensive one. So you see, pommeling is the basis of both defense and offense out of open guard situations whenever you're on your back. We We just looked at leg pummeling as one of the key elements of guard retention. Now let's look at leg scissoring. As a general rule, for most of the more common forms of guard passing, your opponent will pass one leg at a time. Understand that as one of your legs get passed, it is up to you to get the other leg to engage and defend the leg that is being attacked. So as one leg gets passed, the other leg must kick in and provide your defense until you can recover your guard overall. This general pattern of leg play is often referred to as leg scissoring. In a situation where I start off in front of my opponent goes to pass on a given side of my body and comes around to my left-hand side. Okay, it's up to me now as my opponent passes and my knees go to face away from my opponent. He's passing on my left-hand side. What he wants is to get around my leg and make my knees point away from him. So the onus is on us now to take our other leg, in this case my right leg, and throw it back to face my opponent. So every time he goes to pass on a given side, my knees end up pointing in the wrong direction. So I need to bring my knees back to face him, and in this way we learn to scissor our legs from one side across to the other. So as an opponent passes on one side, our legs, or in this case one leg, recover and bring us back into a winning position. So if we have a training partner in front of us, and say for example he's down 2 knees and gets underneath my leg and starts passing in this direction, I need to be able to post and bring my leg over. He goes to pass in the opposite direction. From here, I need to be able to post and bring my leg over. He goes to pass in a given direction. We post and throw the leg over. So every time I see him going in a given direction, we want to create a frame and a scissoring of the legs until ultimately we can face our opponent and go back into a good attacking position. Okay? If, for example, my opponent's in a Toreando type situation and goes to throw my legs by and pass, we want to be able to post and then from here scissor my leg over my opponent's body. Then from here we align ourselves and find ourselves now in a situation where from here we get back into our various forms of counterattack to put the man down. So every time we have an opponent who's passing on a given side, he passes to my other side. Look how from here we post it on our training partner and my leg scissors over the top and creates an alignment. He goes to pass on the opposite side, we post, we scissor our legs, and as a result, we find ourselves back in a winning position. In this way, we can use leg scissoring to recover guards after an opponent aggressively closes distance and gets angle upon us. Now, the high leg spin is a body movement which is often associated with guard retention. It's also an important part of pin escapes from a particular pin, north-south pins, which becomes very important as you progress further up the sport. It's a movement which isn't taught very often, but should be, because it's an essential part of your ability to retain guard against a strong passer. The idea is that I'm going to throw my legs directly over my head, a high leg action. I'm going to make contact with an opponent and spin 180 degrees and put him back in my guard. So it requires some dexterity on your part to come up confidently onto the points of your shoulders and make a good 180 degree turn. Of course, you'll have to be able to do this in a fairly short period of time against a resisting opponent, and sometimes with quite a bit of body weight on top of you. So good body mechanics are important here. Now, when we go live against an opponent, we use our opponent as the method of turning. But of course, when you're operating solo, you don't have an opponent there. So what are we going to use? We're going to use the mat, okay? Which is, believe it or not, it's actually harder to do this move solo than it is with an opponent, because you actually have to reach further to get to the mat. So let's look at the move itself. Okay, I have an opponent who has managed to pass all the way up beyond my shoulder line and get to a north-south type position over my head. And as a result, it's not possible for me now just to scissor my legs and reach him. So we're going to have to go the extra distance. We're going to throw up a high leg. The idea of a high leg is my 2 feet are going to make contact with the mat. When we go up, one of my feet is going to touch the mat. And then from here, I'm going to turn 180 degrees. So I was initially facing to the east. Then I finish up facing to the west. Now, you never know which side your opponent is going to pass on, so you have to be able to do this on both sides, just like all the other defensive movements. For your offense, you pretty much know what side you favor, so you just train it on one side. But defensive movements and guard retention, you don't know which side he's going to pass to, so it's important you work both sides. Key idea is knees come up to chest, and my spine takes on the shape of the bottom of a rocking chair so that I can move efficiently. If my back is flat, you'll never be able to do the movement from this position. So the first thing is discipline with the spine, which creates a rocking chair effect where we can move up easily onto the points of our shoulders. Then we make contact with the mat, and I use the mat to turn. We end up with our knees in close together where they should be, ready to defend guard. So once again, the legs come up. One leg will be further forward than the other. Don't come up with 2 feet together. Now, there's the contact with the mat. There's the turn. And we put them back in guard. Okay? So let's look at this, how it might be used in a combat application. Giancarlo is standing over me, and he puts his hands, one over the top, one in front, and he spins me to north-south. So now everything happened very quickly, and we're in a critical situation. From here, Giancarlo goes to drop on top of me. I keep a frame in front of his body, and from here, I throw my body around the corner. We spin 180 degrees, and we're back in guard and ready to play from bottom position. So once again, a common situation where this might be used, opponent toreadors and spins right in here. I keep elbow and knee together. So when he comes on top of me, you've got a good frame in place. You can put all your weight on me. Now, with our frame in place, I place my knee, my leg in front, push, and now we're back in good position, go into our counter offense. Okay? So this might be a practical way in which we use this movement. Let's go further into these essential body movements of the sport of jiu-jitsu. We're about to take a new turn now. Everything we've been looking at so far involved bottom position where we were on our back. But please understand there are 2 bottom positions in jiu-jitsu, guard position and turtle position. So the second form of bottom position in jiu-jitsu is situations where we're in a turtle type situation, any variation of turtle position, and our opponent's on top of us and behind us, or potentially in front of us, okay? But he's on top, we're underneath. So most of the time when we talk about bottom position in jiu-jitsu, we talk about situations where we're on our back, working like so, okay? But please understand there are 2 kinds of bottom positions in our sport. And this is the second kind, where we're in some variation of turtle position and working with an opponent on top of us, either behind or in front, okay? The sit out works in situations where we're underneath an opponent in this prone position and he's in front of us. It might be because he has a front body lock. It might be because we're in on a single leg and he has a whizzer. Whatever the reason, we're in a situation just like so. What we want to be able to do is create a post hand, and then from here, take a hand off the floor and create a sit-out action where I bump back with my elbow and I sit out and my body comes up to an upright posture, chest out, shoulders back, head up just like so. Okay, so I start here on my knees, then from here, elbows come up off the mat, and then from this position, a leg comes out. That creates an angle where we can push the hips forward, the head goes back, the shoulders go back, and we hit a short sit, coming down to our hip just like so. Now, the single most common mistake that I see when people hit this move is they overset and they come through to a position where you lose stability here, and you can be taken back onto your back. That's not what you wanted. We want to stay chest down to the floor after the movement. So we start off just like so. From here, we build up, we put a leg up, and then that creates space for my knee to slide, and we slide through to a hip and come into a position just like so. As a result, the opponent who was on top of us will tend to tip and fall and lose balance as we come out. Right now, our opponent, our imaginary opponent, is balanced on the flat of our back. What we want to do is create a situation where our back changes angle and he slides off. His body weight just slides off like water off a duck's back. And then from this situation, we're able to come back and into our opponent and go on the attack. Let's have a look at how this might look with an opponent on top of us. The first situation we want to look at is one where our opponent has a front body lock. So he's on top and he's taking his two arms behind my two arms and he has a body lock just like so. So he locks on tight, tight, tight. From here, we're going to start by taking our leg out. And then from here, my elbow comes to Giancarlo's elbow and I hit a simple sit out that takes my opponent and creates a situation where I've gained height on my opponent like so. Okay. Now from here, it's an easy thing for us to come up towards our opponent's back and switch positions. We went from bottom to top position. So once again, from a front body lock situation, our opponent locks up tight. From here, we bring our leg out. My elbow goes to his elbow, and we hit that short sit. Off the sit, my head comes out, my hips go forward, and my two shoulders go back. And as a result, we're in perfect position now to go through and take top position on our opponent. We can also lengthen this from a situation where my opponent has the front body lock. I may decide initially to come up into a tripod type situation and get my knees and elbows off the mat. This will create an easier turn and a bigger amplitude in the movement. Whereas the shoulders and hips come back, we hit that sit out, we hit once again a situation on the opponent where we can get through into good position. They're both excellent options, whether we come up into the tripod first or whether we do it from down on our knees. Another common situation where we hit this one is out of a single leg situation down on the floor. So I've come up into single leg and my opponent has a good whizzer on just like so. As I feel my opponent go to sprawl and I feel I'm losing the leg. Look how as we lose the leg, we get an opportunity to hit that short sit and then from here come back into the legs and into our opponent's back or into another attempt with a single leg or what have you. So I start off single leg situation down here on the mat. As I feel I'm losing the leg to the sprawl. Look how my hands come off, my head comes out, and then from here we hit that short sit out action where everything comes up and I build up to my base just like so. And from here we go into our training partner's legs. I could go into a second form of takedown or we could climb for height and go towards our training partner's back. Your choice. It is possible to hit this movement out of front headlock situations. It can be used, but there is some danger of your opponent countering with guillotines, etc., etc. So typically we use this against body locks. You can do this as a repetitive movement. My training partner just holds the body lock. And from here, we sit out on one side, we come back to the other, and we go in just like so. But this is more for a partner drill rather than the solo drills that we're focused on. So he locks on tight. From here, in the solo drill, it's more about that short movement, which just flicks our opponent off and gives us the height we're looking for. Back straight, head up, and now we're in the perfect position to go in and attack our training partner and put them down to the mat. So this is an excellent body movement from bottom position turtle when our opponent's working from body locks or we're working from a single leg tight situation. We hit that quick sit out and get a second chance from underneath our opponent's body weight. Let's look at the skill of rolling. There are three main categories of rolls that you're going to have to become familiar with. These are shoulder rolls, Granby rolls, and forward rolls. Of the three in the sport of jiu-jitsu, shoulder rolling is probably the most important. It's the one we use most of the time, but the other two are pretty important too. So we'll cover them all together. The idea behind a shoulder roll is, the name implies, we're going to put one shoulder down to the mat and roll through into a guard position. So we start with an opponent out to our side, we put our shoulder down to the mat, and then from here we create a situation where my feet come up and I get my toes into the mat so I can put my head inside my own legs. And as a result, we can put an opponent back in guard position. The key idea here is to go from a situation where my head is outside my legs to a situation where my head is inside. That's a weight-bearing position where we can easily put an opponent back in guard even when he's trying to stop us with his body weight. So here we are. We have an opponent. We choose one side. Let's say he's out to my right-hand side. And from here, shoulders come down to the mat. My legs turn out. And then from here, we start that pushing action. I split my legs. And from here, my head is between my own legs. And as a result, we can go down into guard position and put that man back in guard. This is designed to create a situation where we started in a turtle position and finished in a guard position. The understanding is turtle position it's an effective bottom position, but it has the increased risk of back exposure. In guard position, my back's on the ground, so there's no exposure of my back to my opponent. And so most people, given a choice between turtle and guard position, will generally go for guard position. There's more offense out of there and much less risk of back exposure. So once again, we put a hand out, a shoulder down, and then everything is about creating a drive with our legs. Currently, my head is outside of my legs, but when I look up to the ceiling, my legs come around. Then from here, we can go through and put our opponent back in guard position. Now, the width of your legs, how far they split, is not particularly important. Some people go very wide, some people go quite narrow. Remember that ultimately, you only have to put your opponent back in guard, which means your knees as wide as his hips. So you can see you don't really need to spread your legs very far apart to do that. In fact, you could even argue it's not a good idea to spread the legs far apart because that'll make it easier for your opponent to go into leg lock counters when you get into more advanced aspects of the sport. Typically, when I hit this move, I like to keep my legs relatively close together because many of my students are very dangerous with leg locks, and so it's not a smart thing to separate legs far apart where the legs get isolated one from the other. So that's our first movement, the idea of a basic shoulder roll. Second movement is a Granby roll. Here, we don't roll so much down to a conventional guard position as we roll across two shoulders and either end up back on our knees, as you would in the sport of wrestling, or on a hip, as you probably would in the sport of jiu-jitsu. So typically, not always, but typically when we hit a Granby roll, we do so with a greater degree of amplitude. A shoulder roll is a pretty low amplitude move. It's just a gentle roll over the shoulder that puts you back in guard. In a Granby, you're trying to create space between you and your opponent. So typically there's a greater order of magnitude, amplitude of the move. So what we typically do for Granbys is we'll come with our knees off the mat. So if I have an opponent out to my right-hand side, then from here we'll come up into a situation where we tripod just like so, and then I take my foot and put it here like so. If I keep my feet in this position, my opponent can throw a hook into my leg and start scoring points on me, causing problems. But when I step across, I shut that hook out. It also creates a situation now where I can just put my leg through and come down to a hip. Okay? And from here we face our imaginary opponent, and we're back in neutral position and ready to go. So from a turtle situation, we're here. We want to get out and away and create space away from our opponent. We come out, and I come across with my foot. And as a result, we come up not to guard position, but up to a hip, neutral position, from where we can come back and grapple with our opponent from neutral. So, there's the first movement. There's the cross step. Then from here, this leg comes off the ground, and we roll on through. Turtle position start. Leg comes up, cross step, up to a hip, neutral position. Okay. Now this stands in contrast to the third form of rolling that we must become familiar with, forward rolls. Here we come up to our given base, like a 4-point type position. Then from here, I just take my body straight on through and I roll over my scapula. Don't roll over any one shoulder. We roll over the scapula in a direct forward motion. This is typically a very useful entry into leg locks when someone is behind us. And we come up just like so. Then from here we'd reach between the legs, catch our opponent by the legs, and roll straight on through into various forms of advanced leg lock. This one does require a little more flexibility than the shoulder rolls. Shoulder rolls require almost no flexibility. Granbys require almost no flexibility. This one does require that your head can go level with your knees. So if I'm level with the camera here, you will see in slow motion that as we come in, my head will have to come almost inside my knees so that I look up to the ceiling when I go through. So it's not crazy flexibility, but a little more flexibility is required for this than the first two rolls we looked at. So first, let's look at the 3 rolls of jiu-jitsu. The first, arguably the most important, the one we use most of the time, is also the easiest to perform. This is the shoulder roll, where we go through and push, and from here we go back into some form of guard position. In a Granby roll, there's greater amplitude because you're trying to create distance and go back to a neutral position rather than a guard position. Okay. From here, we cross step and come back to face our opponent. Okay. Then we have forward roll when we come up, and then from this position, I tuck straight through and roll. This is usually done as an entry into the legs. Let's have a look at how these might look in a situation where you're going with an opponent. We have an opponent out to our right hand side, and I notice he has a tight waist grip, an arm around my waist. I do not use this move when my opponent has a seatbelt grip. This would not be an intelligent time to hit a shoulder roll, because this will he will literally stay on me and get hooks in. So the intelligent time to use this move is when my opponent has unlocked hands, okay? But if the hands are locked above the shoulder, seatbelt grip, this is not the time for shoulder roll, okay? Instead, it's used in times where he has unlocked hands like so. Now from here, look how I swish it with my legs. I shoot my arm through, strong arm. Then from here, I come up into this position and I roll towards the armpit. A very common mistake here is people roll towards the hips. That's a disaster. You'll see, in this case, strong, tight waist. If I roll towards the hips, he just pulls my hips, and it's all gone. Okay? It's very important we roll towards the armpit. So that requires us to create a drive leg, where I go through with the shoulder, and we come up just like so. Now from here, we put a leg on his back. So when he comes back to face us, you could go into closed guard, you could go into triangles, whatever you want. But the important thing is that idea of coming up, strong tight waist. I come up, it's like here. Now look how as my head goes between my legs, even as Giancarlo puts weight on me, my legs are connected to the floor. If there's no connection with the mat, he can pull and put me down. Okay? So I need those drive legs connected to the mat. I come out. My head goes through underneath. I aim my hips at his armpit. And from here, we're pretty effective. Now I can take my two hands and fight his hands. And as a result, we can come back into winning positions. Now, if my opponent has a body lock behind me, this might be a good time for us to hit, say, for example, a Granby. He locks on a tight body lock. From here, we're going to come up, tripod position. If I stay like this, he can take his right foot and hook in. We don't want that happening. So we cross step. Now when he tries to get the right foot in, it's not going to happen. It's not there to be taken. Now from here, I just hit that Granby, and we end up in neutral position, facing our opponent, ready to go. When my opponent's all the way standing behind me and has a body lock, another good one from these situations is just to roll straight on through. As he locks tight from here, look, I just put my head down on the floor and we roll straight into our training partner's legs. And from here, many ways we can go to work. So these are some practical ways in which we can use the act of rolling. 3 main variations: shoulder roll, Granby roll, and forward roll. All 3 very useful. A method of escape which is not used so much in fundamental level or beginner level jiu-jitsu, but which becomes very important as you go into the upper echelons of jiu-jitsu and more advanced levels, are standing escapes, where you go from a bottom turtle position and you stand back up to a neutral position. These forms of escapes are often associated more with the sports of wrestling than they are with jiu-jitsu, but they become very important, especially in no-gi grappling, etc., etc. The way they're performed in jiu-jitsu has to be quite different from the way they're performed in wrestling, because the rules are obviously different. There's things which happen in jiu-jitsu which aren't really options in wrestling. So the manner in which we hit an inside leg stand-up is a little bit different in our sport. Okay, from a situation where I'm in turtle position and I've decided I want to get back up to my feet and back to a neutral position and away from the ground. Let's say we have an opponent out to our right-hand side. I'm going to come up with the inside leg. So my hands and elbows have to come up off the mat. I start down like so in turtle position. We go hands to elbow, and then my inside leg comes up. From inside leg, I keep my elbow close to my opponent's body, and my second hand monitors my opponent's hand. Okay? Then from here, in the sport of wrestling, typically when we go to stand up from situations like this, people come forward with the hips and put weight on the hands so it's easier to break the grips. That's a dangerous thing in the sport of jiu-jitsu, because in Jiu-Jitsu, an opponent behind you can simply just sit backwards and suck you back into the rear mounted position. Now, they couldn't really do that in the sport of wrestling. It's a little risky. It's not wrong in the sport of wrestling. There's things they can do there, but it's not their first option. But it probably is the first option in Jiu-Jitsu. If he pulls you backwards and puts 2 hooks in, you just scored 4 points. So that's a good thing for your opponent. So typically, I'm not an advocate of traditional hips forward, weight on the hands methods in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. What I am an advocate of is weight forward, defending the hooks, and walking consistently away from our opponent. And then we fight the hands, get the hands off, and cut back and face the man. So once again, we start off, we have an opponent out to our right-hand side. From here, we build up, elbows come off the mat, then we come up like so, holding onto our opponent's hands, elbows in close, and then everything is a walk up to our feet, moving away until we can turn in and face the man. One more time. The main danger we're facing is the idea of our opponent getting hooks in, scoring points, or getting to a strangulation. So from an initial starting position, we want to come up, inside leg comes up. Then from here, everything is a walk forwards. Walking, monitoring hands, elbow in, and facing our opponent. So, in a situation where my opponent has a tight waist grip with his left arm and a hand on my bicep, like so, and we want to get up to neutral position. Okay. From here, I start off, hands on the mat, elbows off the mat. Then everything comes up. I catch my training partner's hand on this side, and my inside leg comes up. Now, as he tries to hold me back, from here, I want everything going forward, walking away. I put his hand in my back pocket, and then from here, I turn and face my opponent, and now I'm in a position to go in and counterattack or what have you. So once again, we have an opponent out to our side. He's behind us, holding bicep, and we're starting position just like so. We want to get back up into standing position. So everything comes up. We catch the hand, we bring elbow and knee together, and from here, we start walking away. If I start doing this, Giancarlo can suck me backwards, and from here, hooks go in, and you just scored 4 points. Okay, so we don't want that kind of thing going on. So it's important that our body weight be going forwards. He goes to suck me back, and here, it's hard. We monitor his legs. He tries to put hooks in. We're monitoring legs the whole time. Okay, and fighting hands, and now we're in perfect position to go in and counter. So once again, we have an opponent out to our side. Our thing from here, we start off in a broken down position. We come up, everything coming up off the floor. The inside leg comes up. If I come in here, his look can go in and cause problems for us. So we join elbow and knee together. I start a walk that takes me away from my opponent so we can fight hands, and then from here we're back in neutral position and ready to play. This is an effective way of getting back up into a standing position that's well adapted to the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. Let's look at one of the most important of all the turtle position movements. This is the sit back. This is designed to take us from a prone turtle position to a supine guard position. The idea is that I have an opponent on top of me, either to my side or in front of me. And from here, we're going to put a post leg up. Then from here, I'm going to have a turning leg that turns and goes inside my post leg. My head moves back away from my opponent, and from this position, we put our opponent back in guard. Okay? This can be when my opponent's out to my side or directly in front of me. It's effective in both cases. It'll even work when someone's directly behind you. There's a sense here in which I want to make my knees face towards my opponent when he's out to my side. So everything begins with my knee facing my opponent. And then he goes between my knees and we put the man back in guard position. It's more complex when someone is directly in front of us in, say, for example, a front headlock type situation, because now their weight is on my head. Realistically, you can't expect just to lift someone with your neck like this. No one's that strong. So what we have to be able to do is move our head along the mat. Okay, try to imagine the guy on top of you is 300 pounds. The only way you can effectively move is back like so to put him back in guard position. If you watch my foot movement, from here, foot goes up, leg comes off the mat and pivots. And as a result, my legs split and we put our opponent back in guard position. It's a little easier when our opponent's out to the side. Now I only have to turn a small angle. So I just sit on my hip. Then I just split my legs and we put our opponent back in guard. If my opponent is directly behind me, then there may have to be a sense in which I have to turn and face my opponent. And then from here, we sit back to put him in guard. So if we have an opponent in front of us, let's say, for example, he's in front headlock situation. From front headlock, he locks tight, tight, tight. From here, we're going to put our leg up. I pivot underneath my training partner's body. And as a result, we can sit back and put our man back in guard. If Giancarlo is out to my side and he has, for example, a seatbelt grip, under these circumstances, a good tactic for us might be to open up our legs and sit and catch our training partner like so. And from here, it's an easy thing for us to put our man back in guard position. If Giancarlo has a body lock and he's behind me, in situations like this, it may be good for us just to take our feet, swish our feet, and then from this position, my knee opens towards my training partner, and as a result, we're able to sit and put the man back in guard. Probably the one that will give you the most problem when you first start off is the front headlock situation. Notice that, lock the other side then. From here, I cannot just bring my head up. Put all your weight on me, Giancarlo. I can't, no one's that strong. I can't put my head up like that. So what I have to do essentially is just sit back and away from him. Just fold underneath his body so that from here, we can go through and put the man back in guard. Okay? So this movement is a rather unspectacular looking movement. It looks like you just kind of flop over onto your side. But statistically, it's probably the most important of the various forms of escape from turtle position. It's the one we use more than any other by a landslide. The key element is this idea of sitting to a hip. If I have to bear my opponent's weight over my head, then we have to pivot and put our man back in guard. But the key idea is this idea that Giancarlo's out to my side here. Look how as my knee opens, and we pivot, my knees now face him. And as a result, very easy to put him back in guard. Okay? So when he's out to the side, we just turn, and now we face him. Here, he's behind my elbows, so he technically has my back at this point. But when I turn and pivot, now my elbows and my knees are between us. When he's behind my knees and elbows, he's on my back. But by sitting back, we create situations where now my knees and elbows are in front of him. He's no longer on our back. If, on the other hand, front headlock situation, other side, from here, we come up, and now I have to sit further back and away. Everything goes down towards the floor, and now we find ourselves back in guard position. So these sit backs aren't the most glamorous looking moves in the sport, but they are among the most effective, a move that you must master when you're working from bottom position turtle. Now we're starting to look at solo drills for top position. Let's understand that there are far fewer solo drills from top position than there are from bottom. But they're important ones nonetheless. Probably the single most important skill when we're in top position in Jiu-Jitsu is the skill of passing your opponent's guard. Now, many of the movements associated with passing a guard do require a training partner, but there's a few that don't. Probably one of the more important ones that don't require a partner are the idea of standing up inside an opponent's closed guard in order to open it. Okay, so let's look at the solo drill associated with that. We're going to be inside an imaginary opponent's closed guard. He's got his legs around us, and from here with our hands based on our training partner's biceps. From here we're going to stand up by putting one leg up and turning the other leg out. So as I go up to one leg, you'll notice my left leg goes up and my right leg goes out. This widens my base of support. My feet are very close together. That's not good. If I stand up like this, my feet are too close together, I'll have no base of support. So from here, we have to widen the base of support. That's how we do it. Then we come up to a second leg, and from this position, we come up into vertical posture. I want to finish with my shoulders over my hips. If my shoulders are in front of my hips, I can be pulled forward onto my toes and pulled back into various kinds of attack from guard position. So what we're looking for here, when we go to stand up, we have an imaginary opponent we're locked in as closed guard. We pop up one, elbow and knee close together, elbow and knee close together, and then from here the hands come back and we come up into vertical posture. Hips forward, chest and shoulders back, and from here we can look to open imaginary opponent's closed guard. So once again, there's our start position. Pop up, 1, 2, into vertical posture. Facing the camera, start position, vertical posture, and we're ready to pass. We have a training partner with us. From an initial closed guard, we have hands on the biceps. We pop up, 1, 2, elbows come back, vertical posture, and then from here, we look to open our training partner's closed guard. Hands on biceps, stand up to the hip line, vertical posture, hips forward, and opening the closed guard. If you want to get a little more realistic with your movements, you might also incorporate, over to the side for a minute, you might also want to incorporate the idea of stepping out of your opponent's hands. Since when we go to stand up in a closed guard, a common thing is for our opponent to grab our ankles. So as we come up into vertical posture, we use a step out. This mimics the action when we come up into vertical posture. Often they will grab, drop their knees, and from here look to knock us down. So we practice the skill of vertical step outs so we get away from his hands. As he goes to grip our ankles, he drops his knees. If I just stay here, he can knock me over. I can't kick straight back, lock tight to my ankles. I can't kick my legs straight back. He's holding in that direction. So I have to go forward and out. High leg and out. Okay? So once again, we pop up and high leg out. So in the solo drill, we would come up into vertical posture, high leg and out. This is a useful way to drill the actions associated with standing up and opening a closed guard. Another very valuable skill that we need to work solo in top position are footwork skills associated with passing an open guard. Probably the one which is the most obvious is Toreando type footwork drills, where I have to go from a situation where I'm relatively square to my opponent to one where I step and step my feet to the side so that I misalign myself relative to my opponent. I have an angle on my opponent and I can start passing. So if I start off square with the camera, we get a step and then I change my orientation from facing this way here and turning my body 90 degrees so that my legs are now lined up with my opponent and we're in a position to push his legs out and away from us. So the motion is a small side step and then a back step. We come back square, small side step, back step, square, side step, back step. And in this way, we create an angle on an opponent. So if we have an imaginary opponent in front of us, sorry, have a real opponent now, we're in front of our training partner just like so. We want to create a situation where I create an initial angle on my training partner and then I come out to an angle out to the side. I come back in front of my training partner, a small side step, and then a back step that puts me in a position out here at an angle ready to begin passing. So there's that first movement, just out to the side, and then a turn to an angle. I don't want my opponent hooking into this leg. That's going to create all kinds of problems. So the idea is I won't give him a leg to hook into. Once we get a hold of our training partner here, I just take my leg back and away, and we're in a good position to pass. And either side, we find ourselves out to an angle now. So that's the first form of footwork. Second form of footwork is a cross step, where I take a side step and a step around my opponent's legs. Side step, crescent step. Side step and crescent step. Side step and crescent step. And this too can be very useful. I'll demonstrate it first on a seated opponent. From a seated situation, I side step and then I crescent step around behind my opponent, forcing him into a defensive belt posture. So we post, side step, crescent step up to the hip line. Side step, crescent step, shoulder step. Side step, crescent step, shoulder step. On a supine opponent, similar things. From here, side step, crescent step, shoulder step. When this is combined with hand work, you'll see that it's pretty easy for us under these circumstances to get into good position on our opponent. So these are some simple solo drills. The Toreando drill, where we practice the skill of moving our legs to an angle. Then side step, crescent step, shoulder step to get up to and beyond our opponent's hip line. These are some simple footwork patterns that make a difference for your guard passing skills. Let's start to look at solo drills for the standing position. The first and most important is that of stance and motion. From a situation where we're standing in front of an opponent, we're going to play between square stances, which are predominantly defensive in nature. Okay, and staggered stances, which are predominantly offensive in nature and allow us to go into a lunge position, which will enable us to attack an opponent and shoot on a takedown. When we're mostly interested in defense, we're interested in getting our legs back and away from our opponent. Typically, square stances tend to work very, very well. But when it's time to actually engage in offense, typically we'll have a leg forward and ready to work. Most of the time, when we go to reach an opponent, we'll reach with the rear hand. That's not always true, but a lot of time it is. The idea is that if I start reaching too much with the lead hand, I leave my leg, the one that's closest to my opponent, quite vulnerable to being shot. So what we want is a hand, defensive hand, in front of the leg that forms a barrier between my leg and my opponent. That leaves us a rear hand to reach with and pull, push, tie up wrists. Once we make contact with the rear hand, then we can safely bring the lead hand up. Okay? As we do this, we have to move in short, choppy steps around the mat. I don't want to stand up too tall. It's very easy enough for my opponent to get on my legs. But on the other hand, jiu-jitsu matches are longer than wrestling matches. So it's not realistic to expect us to be bent over all the way as we would in a short wrestling match for a 10 or 20 minute jiu-jitsu match. Rather, we tend to work more from a semi-crouch where our shoulder is over our lead knee, just like so. And as a result, it's a little more relaxed and easier to work with for long periods of time. If, however, I see my opponent is in a radically lower stance than myself, I may well be tempted to bring my head down to match his head level, unless, of course, I'm trying to bait him into an attack on my legs to go into guillotines or what have you. But basically our measure is what is the height of our training partner's head. And if it's low, we'll go lower. If it's higher, we'll go a little higher. And then from here, we work short, choppy steps, switching stances, etc., around the mat, and working between square stance and coming back into a staggered stance. Working like so, reaching mostly with the rear hand, like so, keeping a defensive knee and elbow together, so it's going to be hard for our opponent to shoot at. One of the major defensive movements associated with the standing position is that of sprawling. An opponent gets to tries to shoot in on our legs. Our goal is to get our legs to move down and away from our opponent. He's looking to bring the legs in and up. We're looking to get our legs down and away. The way this is often taught is in terms of a radical throwing of the hips and legs back to the mat. Often that's a form of overreaction, which can leave you in a very extended, vulnerable position to a second or another form of offense from your opponent, where he fakes and takes advantage of your overextended position, where he snaps you down to the floor, etc., etc. As a general rule, what we're looking to do with our first element of defense is get our knees to the mat. And then based upon what we see, then from there we decide going into a full sprawl or what have you. A much less radical form of defense to a sprawl is a simple down block. And the majority of our initial defense is actually more of a down blocking action than a full sprawling action. So let's have a look at the idea of a down block from a situation where we work in front of an opponent and I have my defensive hand, elbow and knee close together. As I reach like so, my opponent is mostly going to be interested in shooting on the leg that's closest to him. From here, when I see my opponent go to work, we're going to focus on bringing our hand to the floor and the leg goes back. So I'm not sprawling. I just put a defensive hand in front of my opponent so the arm is there as a barrier and he goes onto my arm. Okay, so if I have my right leg forward, my right arm is my defense arm. It'll also be my offense arm too. We'll cover that another time. From here, as he goes into to shoot, my leg goes back and my hand goes down to the floor. I don't want him just getting into the leg. So defensive hand goes down, the body goes down with it, and the leg goes back, like so, giving him very little to work with. You now, if necessary, you could go into a sprawl from here, but if your opponent merely faked and didn't go in on the leg, you'd be in a good position just to resume working in the standing position. So here we are, we have a given staggered stance, and we just practice that down blocking action. That's a fairly conservative method of defense that doesn't put us in a vulnerable, overextended position. When we practice sprawling, we just practice mostly going down to a knee. So there's a level change. When I see him coming in, we practice just coming down to our knees like so. If the guy gets in on the leg, that's when we'll begin that full sprawling action, shoelaces down to the mat, legs down and away. But when I just come down to a knee, if it all turns, my opponent's shot was a fake one, I'm still in a pretty good position to defend myself. Okay, I'm athletic here, I can get back up. Now, how we get back up is very important. The naive thing to do is just to put a leg up, and then you're very vulnerable to a second form of shot. Okay, so the right thing to do most of the time here is to circle up. So we still have our defensive hands down on the floor, we put our legs up, and from here, with my legs back and away from my opponent, I start the action of circling back up to my feet. So I never offer him a free shot, a free second shot at my legs. So the first defensive movement is the most conservative. That's the down block, where my opponent shoots, or at least pretends to shoot, and from here, we just down block. He comes onto my defensive arm, just like so. Now, when we see a more serious shot at the legs, from here we just go down with our knees on the mat. We don't get overextended, okay? We're in a position now where we can recover by circling back up to our feet. So we go in, down block, sprawl, make a decision where we want to go. It's usually down and away with the legs. And if it turns out his shot wasn't a real one, then we circle back up to our feet. Down block. Knees down to the mat, legs back and away, and circle back up to our feet. If we bring a training partner in, if we're here in the standing position and my opponent shoots out on my lead leg, boom, I just bring the leg back and away from him. So they have a defensive hand, he goes to shoot, and we just bring the leg back and away. He shoots, the leg goes back and away, now you're in a position to go back in on him. If my opponent goes in a more serious fashion on my legs, and from here, we just get the knees down like so. Arms in front, or tight waist in, just like so. When he goes in on the legs, we make a decision now about how serious the sprawl will be. If he's really trying to come in hard on the legs, we're looking always to stuff, get our hands to his knees, and create situations where we get the legs down and away. Now, if I have an opponent in front of me, and I fake a shot, and my opponent goes down to his knees, like so. If he's naive and just puts his leg up, he gives me an opportunity now to hit a second shot that'll put him down. Okay, so we can't be naive in the way in which we come back up. If my opponent fakes a shot on me and I come down like so, I don't just come up and give him a second shot. That's not the way to do things. Rather, we put the legs out and we circle back up to our feet. So we're in a good defensive stance, ready to engage once again. Okay, so once again, if I have an opponent in front of me and I just fake a shot, he goes down to his knees. If he just naively puts a leg up, I'll go right back into my opponent and put him back down. Okay, so it's important when someone fakes that shot and we come down to our knees. From here, the way we get back up is always to circle back up in a conservative fashion where we're ready to defend ourselves. So these are some simple ideas for your solo drilling in the standing position. One of the most important skills that you're going to have to develop is that of carrying your opponent's body weight off a takedown. The most common reaction to any form of leg takedown is always going to be some kind of sprawling action, okay, where you're going to get stuck underneath your opponent's body weight. What we're looking to avoid is situations where we're in on a leg and we get extended with our head down to the mat. This is a position from which recovery is extremely difficult and it's very likely our opponent will score on us either by taking our back or even going to submission holds. Okay, that's what we're actively trying to avoid. What we're trying to create are situations where you can successfully carry someone's weight even when they're sprawling on you and go through to finish your takedown successfully. That means, in general, a posture which our hips are forward, the body is relatively upright, and the head is upright. And from here, we can move and carry weight that's on top of us. So we practice the skills of starting on our knees, and from here with an imaginary opponent in front of us, we practice the skill of going in on a leg and holding a posture which is relatively upright. This might be a double leg situation, like so, or it might be the single leg situation, like so. The main idea is that we're trying to avoid extension with head down. Rather, once we make contact with a given leg, we're always looking to keep our body relatively upright and in a position where we can bear weight as someone stands over us. So if we have a training partner in front of us, once I get in on a given leg, like so, when he goes to sprawl, in situations like this, I want to be able to keep my body relatively upright. I want to be able to switch across to the other side and get to situations where we can take people reliably down to the floor and work successfully. What we're looking to avoid is situations where his leg goes back and we get extended as the leg goes further and further back down to the mat like so. It's almost inevitable now that the opponent will score on us. So we need situations where once we get in on a given leg, from here, he goes to pull those legs back and work, we can get up to our feet from here and into good working positions, like so. So we're going to start this idea of getting in on a leg, body upright. He goes to sprawl, and you can carry your opponent's weight. You can step successfully across your opponent and make a switch to another form of takedown. Okay, if necessary, you can come up behind your opponent and work successfully from the mat. It's all about that good upright body posture, which we always practice in terms of head up, chest forward, working down on the mat, consciously avoiding situations where the head goes down and we get extended. Now we're working our way through what I believe are the most important solo drills for you as a developing athlete in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. We've gone over what I think are the most important general body movements associated with the sport, and we've demonstrated how they pertain to the realistic situation of a resisting opponent. So we've shown the move and then shown the application. Now I want to look at a special topic for solo training. That's the idea of training your spine. Always remember, of course, human beings are classified as vertebrates. Okay, the central feature of our body is that of a skull attached to a spine, and everything else is attached to that. Your training has to reflect that fundamental physiological fact about human beings, and the training of the spine is a very important part of your development in the sport. Understand that there are two major movements associated with your spine. These are rounding movements, where the spine rounds out, like so. I would say the majority of the sport of Jiu-Jitsu is spent in the rounded position, okay? Almost every form of guard position, almost every form of turtle position involves a rounded spine, like so. This stands in contrast with an arched spine, okay? Shoulders back, and a pronounced arch in the spine, like so. And so the sport of Jiu-Jitsu asks us to go between rounded spine and arched spine. I think it's fair to say the majority of our time in Jiu-Jitsu is spent in rounded spine, but let's not underplay the value of an arched spine. Almost all of the major submission holds of the sport finish in an arched position, arm locks, etc. So arching is even though it's less of your time is spent in those positions, the times when you need it are important times. So let's look at how we can train our spine for efficiency in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. Some simple drills that you can do on a daily basis as warm-ups, as part of your training program when you go in solo. Obviously, the two elements we need to work are the arching and rounding aspects. Understand that the two major bending points of the spine will always be the ends of the spine. These occur close to the neck and close to the lower back. So those are going to be the primary focus of your rounding and arching program. Let's start off with the idea of rounding of the spine, since this is probably the more common situation you'll find yourself in the sport of jiu-jitsu. The drill which I want you to work with is a kind of a round-the-world drill, where we just go in circles with a rounded spine. We're going to start off in a seated position just like so, and cross our legs, and from here we're going to come up into an inverted position, just like so. Now from here, I'm going to separate my legs and turn around my body just like so. From here, we just learn to move in a comfortable circle. Here, I'm continuously going over my right shoulder, tracing out a circle along the mat. Notice that when we do this, it starts with a swishering of our legs onto one shoulder, across the scapula to the other shoulder. A slight split of the legs, and we trace out a circle on the mat. Once you've gone in one direction comfortably, then we practice the skill of going in the opposite direction. And the movement is always the same. As you gain in skill, I want you to start using your arms less and less. And what you're going to find is that some degree of neck strength is required to complete the drill. So when you first start off, you'll be using your hands on the mat to give you stability. But ultimately, I want you to work with no hands, so that you're forced to engage the neck muscles as well as the muscles of the lower back. In this way, you develop a certain degree of suppleness in the neck and the lower back, which is going to be extremely useful in the sport of jiu-jitsu. Almost all of the movements involved in the sport from bottom position require that rounding of the spine, okay? And that rounding of the spine is what's going to make you effective at bearing weight underneath an opponent. Now, that was the circular drill. Now the linear drill for rounding of the spine. In the linear drill, we start like so. Instead of me tipping from one side to the other, we tip straight back, as though our spine were the shape of a banana or a rocking chair. We use our legs to carry our weight over our head. So my legs do this motion. As I round my spine more and more, my legs will carry me up and down, up and down. When you get comfortable, you can go from the circular drill to the linear drill. When you learn to round out your spine like this, much of the bottom position game, which is based on the idea of inversion and elevation, becomes second nature to you. It's a great way to try and train the most important element of your spine control, the ability to round your spine and let your spine bear weight. Now, with regards arching of the spine, a very important drill here is the side-to-side bridging drill. We're going to start off supine, just like so, and hit our bridges with repetition, the same way we saw them earlier in this video. Everything starts with the eyes. We look overhead, we come up, and from here we walk and walk and walk until we come up to our knees. Then from here we come back down and we bridge up in the opposite direction. you'll notice that as we perform this drill, we turn 90 degrees. So if I start off facing the camera like so, I'm going to finish perpendicular to my original angle, lined up with my shoulder line. So here we are. Don't stop until your two knees are on the floor. A common mistake is people just bridge like this. You're training yourself to stop when the movement hasn't yet been completed. Remember, the move isn't over until your chest down to the floor. Only then have you turned your opponent successfully over. So make sure you finish on your two knees. Don't finish on your stomach. Nobody is athletic in this position. We need to be able to come up and over. Notice that I have two legs. Initially, it's my right leg which is providing the drive. But then I have to transfer to my left leg. Then it's my left leg that provides the initial drive and passes to the right leg. And in this way, while holding the arch, we develop the arching potential of the human spine. The last element of the human spine that I want you working is the ability to push with your head, which becomes extremely useful in half guard passing, open guard passing, north-south pinning. The idea is we're going to put our forehead on the mat. Initially, just our hands and knees will be on the floor. And when you first start off, just practice circling your head side to side, forwards and backwards. You want to slowly increase the amount of weight that your neck bears. Now you're going to have to go at your own pace because you could hurt your neck if you go too quickly. Then from here, when we feel confident, we can bring our knees up off the mat. And when we feel more confident, we can take our hands to our hamstring. And in this way, you develop good strength to push with your head into your opponent and use your head as part of your attacks, particularly when you're in top position. Now, altogether, these drills gives us a good ability to exploit the potential power of the human spine through rounding, arching, and front bridging. So we start off like so, learning to use the spine in the shape of the bottom of a rocking chair. Then we practice that simple circular drill from side to side. And then strengthening the neck as a pushing instrument used in top position. Training your spine like this on a daily basis will have big benefits for you as a developing student in Jiu-Jitsu. The most important form of strength for the study of Jiu-Jitsu is strength of the muscles that surround the spine. Okay, the muscles of the torso. The human body obviously has a lower body and an upper body, and what connects the two together and makes them work effectively in unison are those crucial core muscles in front and back, which are going to make the unity of your upper body and lower body possible. Perhaps when you watch a beginner's class in Jiu-Jitsu, the things you see exhausted the most are beginners get tired in the stomach and lower back as they try to perform the movements of the sport. So it's important we be strong in this regard. You can watch any given Jiu-Jitsu match, and within a very short period of time, you're going to notice there's a fundamental structure that all good athletes pay attention to. And this is the structure of elbow to knee. The more our elbows and knees are connected, the better we perform. This is true whether we're on our back or when we're in turtle position underneath, prone like so. Things go bad in jiu-jitsu when that elbow and knee connection is broken. The further my elbows and knees are apart, the less effective I am in this sport. But the moment we start bringing elbows and knees together, that's when we become effective jiu-jitsu players. Okay? So the onus is on us to develop the kind of body in which we can easily keep elbow and knee together for extended periods of time. Now, when it comes to prone positions, the exercise which I often advocate, which helps the development of the core strength required to make you successful at joining elbow and knee together, is crawling. Okay, crawling is a very simple exercise you can do anywhere, which tests your ability to keep elbow and knee together in a prone position. So we're just going to start in what looks like a loose kind of push-up position, and we're going to practice the skill of joining elbow and knee on one side. Then we walk and join elbow and knee on the other side. Elbow and knee are joined, and we walk like so. Then we reverse the direction. So we don't turn around and come back, we just reverse direction. Performing this for even relatively short periods of time will test your ability to keep elbow and knee together and provide an excellent beginner level workout for your core strength. You can make it more advanced by periodically adding the idea of one-legged planks as you perform the move. Say, for example, every fifth step, you could add planks for time in order to test your core a little more rigorously. Now, with regards to being on your back and developing the core strength, which is going to make you successful, I like to use crucifix rolls. In a crucifix roll, I make my body into the shape of a crucifix, just like so. Then from here, we join our feet together and bring our legs up and over the top. We stretch out, we bring our head around the corner and go back in. Done in this way, you develop the front element of the core, which makes for a challenging workout if done for long periods of time. Try to maintain your shoulders on the mat. Try to maintain the form I just demonstrated. These are not crushingly difficult moves, but they're a great way for you to develop the kind of core strength which will enable you to maintain elbow and knee integrity for long periods of time when you're working with a resisting opponent. Thank you for your patience and seeing all these various body movements that we've worked our way through. Now it's time to come to the whole purpose of this video, which is to give you an effective workout which is going to bring up your skill level so that when you return to the mats, you're better than the last time you were there. That's my goal. The way this is going to happen is going to involve you You are going to have to develop the idea of using visualization and your imagination as you perform the physical movements. We've seen all the physical movements. Once you start to learn those and you're feeling comfortable with them, then it's time to go beyond just using your body to perform the movements and start integrating your mind. The idea is you are going to picture inside your own head a resisting, competitive opponent. That opponent will be performing various moves on you. Those moves will be left to your imagination. You will respond to those moves so that you actually are taking care of two people, your opponent and yourself. By actively engaging your mind in this process, you become much more than just someone who's performing a set of moves. You're becoming a shadow grappler. Just as a good boxer is a great shadow boxer and actively envisions an opponent performing various moves against him and him responding in a split second in an effective fashion, you're going to do the same thing in grappling. What I'm going to suggest to you is that you use time to set your workouts. I like to see students create 3 5-minute rounds. Okay, I generally find once you go beyond 5 minutes, people's minds tend to wander and they just start to go repetitively through the movements. So break them up into rounds. I recommend 5-minute rounds. In between the rounds, I recommend a 1-minute break, but it's not a normal break. You have to perform one of the movements that we saw earlier in the video, which pertain to your core strength. I'm going to recommend crawling and the idea of crucifix rolls. So between rounds, you do 1 minute of either crawling or 1 minute of crucifix rolls. So you're working hard between the rounds. Then you come back to the next round and you go actively with your imaginary opponent and work. What I'm going to do now is just demonstrate some of these ideas to you. I'm going to be talking as I perform them so that I give you, the viewer, a kind of insight into what I'm thinking. Okay. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing that if I were doing my own workout. I would just be silently talking inside my own head. But I'm just going to try and do this so you can pick up on what I'm thinking as I perform the moves. So let's start off. What I would do is there would be a timer which sounds the beginning of the round. The first thing I do is I imagine where am I in relation to my opponent. So let's say I've chosen to set the guard and I'm walking towards an opponent who's perhaps not the most aggressive guy in the world, and he's moving back and away from me. So I'm scooting in towards my opponent. Suddenly he changes direction and forces me to my back. As he comes around to a given side, I throw a leg up and a frame. And as a result, I'm able to catch my opponent on that side. He goes to the other side, and we practice coming across. He goes over to north-south. We go through, catch, roll, put him back in guard. We return up to a seated position. We're chasing him, going after him. He backs away so far that I decide I'm going to come up to my feet and grapple in standing position. He comes down from my legs. Okay, he gets a powerful grip on my legs and knocks me down to my butt. Comes around behind me. So we have to roll through and put the man back in guard. We return up to seated position. Now I'm down on point. I'm moving aggressively towards this guy now. Again, he's backing up and away, so we move in towards the man. I shoot, I'm going on the legs, boom, and we walk the man down to the floor. Now, I get a good opportunity to go across side and pass my training partner's guard. Unfortunately, as I move into the mount, I get bridged up and over and end up in bottom position. So we're pommeling our legs. He's trying to pass, we're trying to pommel. Sit up and forward, and from here I hike, snap my man down to the floor, and spin around behind him. Now we're on the man's back. We roll through, going onto his back. Unfortunately, he turns inside my legs, and he's back inside my closed guard. From here, we go to work, moving out to the side. He goes into a half guard situation, and as a result, I come up into my training partner's legs and take single leg. From single leg, I feel I'm losing the leg, so I hit a quick sit out. Off the sit out, we're back to neutral. I sit back down to guard, and we go to work like so. Now, I'm going to keep my mouth shut, and you guys are going to try and see what kind of problems I'm confronting. So now you have to do the work as the viewer and see what kind of motions we're bringing in here. Now, with 5 minutes gone, I go into crawls. Alternatively, when the minute is expired, we go back into our solo drills. And in this way, you can get 3 5-minute rounds of action, along with excellent core strengthening in between, which will give you a good workout where you're actively engaged mentally and physically. The great question of this video is, how are we going to get you better at jiu-jitsu when you're spending time off the mats rather than on the mats? My answer to you comes in 3 different directions. There are 3 directions you must go with your training when you can't access your regular gym, which will make you a better jiu-jitsu player. The first is what was the content of this video, the idea that there are certain solo drills, movements, which underlie the actual skills of the sport. For every move in jiu-jitsu, there's a set of underlying moves. The better you get at those movements, the better you'll get at the moves themselves. So the first thing you want to do when you find yourself taken away from the mats for whatever reason is work on those fundamental movements of jiu-jitsu. We've seen that they're radically different from other combat sports and other sports in general, and that in any given sport, what we call athleticism is relativized to that one domain. The athleticism of one sport generally doesn't carry over well to the athleticism of another sport. The second big thing that you want to go and do is to stay in good physical shape. Deteriorations in strength and flexibility and conditioning overall won't do well when you come back to return to the mats. So I always recommend some kind of body program which focuses upon your strength, your flexibility, and your overall body conditioning. Obviously, this would be allied with some kind of nutritional sense where you're not getting overweight. I'm going to leave this up to you. As a coach, over the years, I've seen more or less every kind of strength and conditioning program, every kind of diet program. In truth, after all these years of observation, what I've found is that different athletes respond better to different programs. There has never been any one strength, conditioning, or diet program which made tangible benefits above and beyond any of the other strength and conditioning programs. So you're going to see great advocates of calisthenic training, gymnastics training, Olympic weightlifting, regular bodybuilding, yoga, etc., etc. You're going to see 1,000 things, kettlebell training. All these fashions have come and gone. What I've noted is that they're all very effective, and I've seen world champions of every kind use every kind, but I've never seen anyone change to a given diet or fitness program and it radically improve their performance far beyond what they were doing previously. Okay, that tends to suggest that they all work pretty well. There's, as I said, no one supplementary program has proven dominant over the others. To give you an example, George St. Pierre, when I first knew him as a developing athlete, he was mostly engaged in bodybuilding training, and he did very well early on in his career with that. Then he switched later in his career to an Olympic weightlifting program, and he did very well with that too. Towards the end of his career, he made a switch towards a more gymnastics-based program, and again, he did very well with that. So what you see is that all 3 programs, very different from each other, all got good results, and you can't really say that any one of those programs got radically better results than the others did. As another student of mine, Gordon Ryan, favors a mostly bodybuilding based approach, and he's gotten amazing results with that. Gary Tonin favors something of a compromise between gymnastics work and Olympic lifting, and he gets great results with that. So really what I can say to you is there's 1,000 different strength and conditioning programs out there. I think over the years I've been coaching, I've seen pretty much all of them, and they all got outstanding results. What really determined their effectiveness is not so much the program themselves as how dedicated the student was to the program. That tended to be more the factor involved in whether they succeeded or failed. But there was never a sense in which you looked at one program and, oh my God, this is making them so much better than they were before. That never really happened. So my advice to you is find one which you're comfortable with, which you enjoy, because enjoyment is an important part of it. Because if you don't enjoy it, you won't stick with the program. Find something that suits your body well, you're confident works well for you, and stick with that. Okay, but there has to be some kind of program where you're enhancing your strength, conditioning, and flexibility, and your diet is in order so you're not gaining unnecessary weight during the time off. If you can take care of those 4 things in your own way, then that's an important second part of your program. I'm going to come back later in this video with this. There is one exercise which I make all of my students do, regardless of what kind of strength and conditioning program they're on, but I'll show that to you later on in this video. That's the only thing that I do, put my foot down and I make my students do that, but I'll show you that shortly. Now, with regards to the third element, that is the idea of knowledge. Okay, so your first responsibility when you got time away from the dojo is your solo drills that were the content of this video. Your second is your strength, conditioning, flexibility, and diet program. I leave that one mostly up to you. They're all pretty effective in my experience. And the third program is the development of knowledge. Remember that ultimately the single biggest determining factor in who wins and who loses in Jiu-Jitsu is skill. Skill is embodied knowledge. That's knowledge that you've woven into the movements of your body. Okay? Every skill begins with some kind of knowledge. The best way for you to develop knowledge is typically in the dojo. You have an instructor and he can answer questions in detail and give you a lifetime of knowledge when you're there working with him. But if there's a close second, it's videos. Okay, I strongly urge my students to watch video as much as they can. World champions from past and present. BJJ Fanatics offers instructional videos from some of the greatest players of all time, elite coaching staff, etc., etc. So there's a wealth of knowledge out there. When you can't work on skills, work on knowledge, because knowledge is the precursor to skill. I promise you this, if you can take during that time off, time to work on your movement skills, keep yourself in good physical shape, and increase your knowledge, when it's time to come back to the mats, for whatever reason you were laid off them, you're going to find you're in great shape, you're moving better than you were before, and you have knowledge that you didn't have previously. And as a result, you're going to find there's a period of time when you first come back that the skills come very easily to you. You go through a rapid period of growth, which can be one of the most rewarding parts of your jiu-jitsu training. So again, in summary, at the end of this video, there's 3 things I want you working on whenever you're forced away from the dojo where you normally train. Work on your body movement skills, as outlined in this video. Work on an overall independent and supplemental physical conditioning program, which keeps your strength, flexibility, weight, etc., where it should be during the time off. And then third, work on increasing your knowledge, because knowledge is the precursor to skill, and skill is the ultimate determinant of who wins and who loses in this sport. The whole idea of this video is to enhance your performance, the same thing it is in all of my videos. If you can stick with that simple 3-step program when you're held off the mats for whatever reason, you're going to find when you come back, there's going to be a rapid phase of growth and performance will go up. I promise you this. This has always been my experience as a coach. The only time I've seen people take extended periods of time off the mat and come back worse than they were before, to a degree where it was really noticeable, is when they abandon the sport completely. As long as you keep your body in the game and your mind in the game, you'll come back stronger. But when you just say, let me just take time off and I'll think about it when I come back, that's when you see deterioration. That's when you see people coming back not as good as they were before. I've seen people come back from extended periods of time after terrible surgeries and come back within a very short period of time, get very good again, and in many ways better, just because they worked hard on increasing their knowledge, keeping their body in the best shape they could in the time off, and by working on those supplemental body skills that we saw in this video. Keep with that 3-step program and you'll find you do just fine when it's time to get back to the dojo. You'll remember from earlier in the video, I said that I had seen a great variety of strength and conditioning programs which jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts athletes had used over the years, and that there was never any evidence to suggest that any one of them dominated any of the others. They were all as good as the athlete made them. As long as the athlete was dedicated, stayed with them for a long period of time, they got good results with a wide variety of strength and conditioning programs. So as a general rule, I let the athlete determine which they will choose and then let them be comfortable with that. But there is one exception to that rule. There is one simple exercise which I do insist all of my athletes do on an almost daily basis. This is variations of the simple exercise toes to bar. Essentially, it's a form of leg lift where from a hanging bar, we come up and touch our toes or even ankles or shins to the bar. There are two main variations that I have my students work, and this is something of our daily training. The reason why I insist on this above all other supplemental exercises outside of the gym is because it gets you around the greatest problems that most beginning athletes in jiu-jitsu face. When you look at beginning athletes, the two quickest areas in which they become quickly exhausted when they begin their jiu-jitsu classes are typically the forearms and the front core. Okay, they will fatigue over time in their whole body, but those are always the first two areas to run into crises. So this exercise absolutely enhances your ability to maintain endurance and strength in those two critical areas, and perhaps even more importantly, it makes you strong in what is absolutely the single most important postural demand of jiu-jitsu, which is elbow to knee connection. Okay. The sport will test your ability to maintain knee to elbow connection more than any other. If you're going to fail in the sport of jiu-jitsu, 90% of the failures are going to come from failure to maintain integrity of knee and elbow position as you grapple with your opponent. Toes to bar is the simplest, easiest way for you to develop the kind of core strength you'll need to endure a hard, rigorous match with a tough opponent and maintain that knee to elbow position, which you'll be required for victory. The movement itself is very simple. Okay, we're going to start with a grip on a bar high enough that your toes won't touch the floor. That's the only prerequisite needed. We're going to come down into a hang. The key idea is we're not going to use any form of momentum to generate the lift. Everything begins with the shoulders coming up just like so. Then from there, I generally recommend you work with a minimum of 5 repetitions. Anything less than 5, and you won't be working the endurance of your forearms enough. If you can go more than 12, you should be doing a more difficult variation of the exercise. So somewhere between 5 and 12 should be your goal. It's a relatively easy exercise to perform. Anyone of even moderate athletic potential should be able to do it. I always recommend when you first start off, start in sets of 5 and build from there. When you try to increase the numbers, don't worry about the numbers so much as the execution. Don't get sloppy. No one cares if you get an extra 2 repetitions if you're swinging with momentum. Focus on a good stationary body and a clean lift of the legs with your legs absolutely straight, coming all the way up. That's the first variation. The second variation is a windshield wiper variation, where we go up once and then go for repetitions from one side to the other. Try to build up to around 10 repetitions left and right. So this would look slightly different. In this case, we're going to go beyond toes to bar and bring our shins to the bar. So from the same dead hang, that side-to-side repetition represents well the idea of elbow to knee connection while moving left and right, which is one of the main demands of the sport. These simple exercises are something you can master in a relatively short time frame. If you feel on your first day that you can't perform the exercises, you would go through easier variations where you bring, for example, your knees to your chest, or you only go up halfway, but your goal in the end is always to go up fully to the bar. Obviously there's a beginning level flexibility. I recommend stretching out so you can touch the back of your hands on the floor. That will make it easier. If you're very tight in the hamstrings, that alone will make it more difficult for you. So over time, your flexibility requirement would be the back of your hands to the mat, and then that simple notion of straight arms. Don't cheat with bent arms. Everything at a dead hang. Then from the hang, just a slight shrug of the shoulders. And everything up to the bar. Again, working with a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 12. If you can get 12 to the bar with perfect form, then it's time to move on to a more difficult exercise. This is probably the only supplemental exercise outside of the gym that I insist all of my athletes use. Other than that, I give them carte blanche. They do whatever they want, whatever they feel more comfortable. There's 1,000 different exercise programs out there. All of them I've seen very good results with over time. But this, everyone has to do.